Welcome back, dear viewers, to another mesmerizing case that will challenge everything you believe about the impossible. Before we dive into today's extraordinary mystery, I want you to promise me something. Stick with me until the very end, because what you're about to witness will leave you questioning the very nature of reality itself. And if you find yourself as captivated as I am by these supernatural puzzles, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments which detail caught your attention first. The year was 1892, and the humid embrace of a Mississippi dawn was broken by something that defied all logical explanation. Picture this: pre-dawn fog rolling thick as molten silver across the murky waters, cicadas creating their eternal symphony, while rope creaked rhythmically against weathered mooring posts. The air hung heavy with the sharp tang of diesel and the whispered promises of the river current flowing beneath the levee. But on this particular morning, something was terribly wrong. Holmes and I arrived to find a sight that would haunt the local fishermen for years to come. An empty skiff bumping gently against a splintered piling, as if guided by an invisible hand. Inside the abandoned vessel, a thermos of coffee still radiated warmth, its owner having vanished into thin air mere moments before. The only trace of human presence was a single boot print in the mud. But here's what made my blood run cold. The impression was far too shallow for someone who had supposedly just stepped from the boat. Holmes, ever the methodical detective, immediately began his systematic investigation. I watched as he tested the current direction with a fallen leaf, noting how the silt had layered on the hull and timing the passing barges to infer the precise windows when their wake might have affected the vessel. While the superstitious locals whispered of river lights and the dreaded drowned man's hand that was said to pull unsuspecting souls beneath the surface, Holmes dismissed such folklore, though I noticed him meticulously logging every anomaly in his leather notebook. It was then that we discovered the first tangible clue: a frayed nylon line tied with an expert bowline knot. But something was fundamentally wrong with this detail. The knot was oriented in a way that no right-handed boatman would ever tie it. Someone had been here, someone who knew boats intimately, yet had made a crucial error that betrayed their deception. The game, as Holmes would say, was afoot, and this Mississippi morning would prove to be far more treacherous than the swirling currents below. The missing man's sister stood before us like a pillar of controlled grief, her weathered hands betraying the only sign of her inner turmoil as she rubbed her thumb raw against a worn St. Jude medal hanging from her neck. Margaret O'Brien had the kind of stoic strength that spoke of a life spent weathering storms, both literal and metaphorical, along these unforgiving waters. She explained that her brother Patrick had been a fisherman for 30 years, knew these waters better than the lines on his own palm, and would never simply vanish without explanation. But as Holmes questioned her further, subtle cracks appeared in her composure, particularly when we mentioned the possibility of debts or recent financial troubles. Our first suspect emerged quickly from the river community: Silas Trent, a rival fisherman whose own boat had been repossessed just 3 months prior. The man carried himself with the coiled tension of someone constantly looking over his shoulder, his calloused fingers perpetually oiling a worn pocket knife, while speaking in the clipped, economical language of someone who measured words like precious cargo. When Holmes inquired about his whereabouts during the early morning hours, Trent's answers came too quickly, too rehearsed. The dock watchman, however, proved far more interesting to our investigation. Edwin Marsh avoided direct eye contact with an almost pathological determination, and despite the humid morning air, he reeked faintly of bleach, an unusual scent for someone whose job involved monitoring boats and fishermen. His dented clipboard seemed to be guarded like a state secret, and when Holmes casually asked to review his overnight logs, the man's hands trembled almost imperceptibly. Parish Deputy William Crawford arrived with the territorial swagger of local authority, his boots spotlessly clean despite the mud that seemed to coat everything else along the waterfront. He made it clear that outside interference was neither welcome nor necessary, though his protests struck me as more nervous than authoritative. Fortunately, we found an invaluable ally in Captain Joshua Rivers, an experienced river pilot whose weathered folio contained detailed current charts and barge schedules spanning decades. His knowledge of the Mississippi's moods and patterns would prove essential to understanding the timeline of Patrick's disappearance. As we surveyed the geography of the scene, Holmes mapped out what he called the strategic board, the maze of mooring slips, the blind eddy hidden behind a rotting pier where secrets might be concealed, The bait shack with its flickering beer sign casting erratic shadows, the fuel dock where camera coverage had suspicious gaps, the levee access road that provided perfect escape routes, and the fog-thickened channel bend that could hide a multitude of sins. Our methodical search revealed three crucial pieces of evidence. First, minute metal shavings embedded in the gunnel near the stern clamp suggested recent contact with tools or machinery. Second, a fuel receipt time-stamped at 4:13 in the morning directly contradicted the supposed 3:30 departure time that multiple witnesses had claimed. But it was the third clue that truly puzzled us. A torn hotel laundry tag, pristine and crisp despite the muddy environment, lodged beneath a floorboard as if deliberately hidden. The pressure intensified when Captain Rivers informed us that a storm front was approaching rapidly, scheduled to arrive by dusk. The coming weather would not only erase surface traces but contaminate the entire river with debris, effectively destroying any remaining evidence of what had truly happened to Patrick O'Brien. Just as we thought we were beginning to understand the sequence of events, the first shocking contradiction emerged. Security footage from the fuel dock clearly showed Patrick's skiff present at 4:20 in the morning, yet according to the dock records, a mooring fee had been paid under his name at 4:45. This impossible timeline meant that either the footage was doctored, the payment was fraudulent, or something far more complex was occurring beneath the surface of this seemingly simple disappearance. The locals continued to whisper about supernatural explanations, the river spirits that supposedly claimed souls on foggy mornings, the ghostly lights that danced across the water before dawn. But Holmes had taught me to look beyond superstition to the cold, hard facts that always lay beneath the surface of even the most mysterious circumstances. As the first drops of rain began to fall, we realized that time was not merely running out. It was being deliberately manipulated by someone who understood both the river's patterns and human nature with deadly precision. The web of conflicting testimonies began to unravel as Holmes pressed deeper into the statements of our key witnesses. The dock watchman Edwin Marsh had claimed to hear Patrick's engine sputtering at 3:40 in the morning, describing it as the distinctive sound of a motor running rough on bad fuel. Yet the fuel receipt we had discovered told a completely different story. Patrick had purchased premium marine gasoline at 4:13, making it impossible for his engine to have been running poorly 23 minutes earlier. Silas Trent, the indebted rival fisherman, insisted he had heard laughter echoing across the water around 4 o'clock, claiming it was Patrick's distinctive chuckle that he recognized from years of shared waters. But when Holmes consulted with Captain Rivers about fog density and sound transmission that morning, we learned that the atmospheric conditions would have made it virtually impossible for voices to carry clearly across the distances, Trent claimed. The undercurrents of hidden motivations grew stronger with each conversation. There were uncomfortable silences whenever debts were mentioned, particularly around the bait shack ledger that the owner kept conspicuously out of view. Trent's obsessive knife-cleaning ritual became more pronounced whenever financial matters arose, and his eyes would dart nervously toward the blind eddy where larger boats might conduct business away from prying eyes. Holmes's technical examination of the abandoned skiff revealed a crucial piece of evidence that changed everything. Deep within the propeller well, tangled among the metal blades, were traces of freshly cut synthetic rope fibers. The clean cuts and bright coloration indicated that someone had deliberately fouled the propeller, likely to disable the boat at a specific time and location. This was no accident or mysterious disappearance. It was sabotage. But alongside this cold, mechanical evidence, we discovered something far more personal and revealing. Tucked deep within Patrick's tackle box, wrapped in oiled cloth to protect it from moisture, was a worn photograph showing Patrick standing beside a man in an expensive suit. The location was clearly the riverside casino that operated on one of the larger paddle wheelers, and the edges of the photograph had been rubbed smooth from frequent handling. Someone had treasured this image, but the identity of the suited figure remained tantalizingly unclear. To test our growing theories about the timeline and the boat's movements, Holmes conducted a practical experiment. Using a weighted marker of similar size and buoyancy to Patrick's skiff, we released it into the current from various points along the waterfront. The results were definitive. There was no natural drift pattern that would have carried the boat to the exact position where it was discovered. The vessel had been deliberately positioned against that specific piling. All evidence seemed to point inexorably toward Silas Trent. His debts provided clear motive. His knowledge of boats explained the technical sabotage, and his nervous behavior suggested guilt. The rope fibers matched cordage commonly used on his type of fishing vessel, and his intimate familiarity with Patrick's routines would have given him the perfect opportunity to execute such a plan. But just as we prepared to present our conclusions to Deputy Crawford, Captain Rivers arrived with information that shattered our neat theory completely. The barge logs he had retrieved from the River Authority showed conclusively that Silas Trent had been mid-channel at 4:15 in the morning, working as crew on the packet steamer Delta Queen, with 17 witnesses who could verify his presence. The timing made it physically impossible for him to have been involved in Patrick's disappearance. This revelation forced us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the case. If not Trent, then who had the knowledge, opportunity, and motive to orchestrate Patrick's vanishing? The rope sabotage was clearly the work of someone familiar with marine mechanics. The timing required intimate knowledge of river traffic patterns, and the deliberate positioning of the skiff suggested careful planning rather than spontaneous action. Holmes stood at the edge of the dock, his keen eyes scanning the murky water as if the Mississippi itself might yield up its secrets. The storm clouds were gathering overhead, and I could sense his frustration at having his primary theory demolished by irrefutable evidence. But I also recognized the gleam in his eyes that appeared whenever a case took an unexpected turn toward greater complexity. The photograph of Patrick with the unknown suited figure seemed to mock us from where it lay on the dock, its water-stained surface reflecting the gray sky above. Who was this mysterious companion, and what role did the Riverside Casino play in a simple fisherman's disappearance? The answers, I suspected, lay not in the muddy waters of the Mississippi, but in the darker currents of human greed and desperation that flowed just beneath the surface of this river community. The breakthrough came when Holmes examined the mysterious laundry tag with his magnifying glass, revealing details that had escaped our initial inspection. The fabric quality and specific cut of the tag immediately identified it as belonging not to a common hotel, but to the high-end uniforms worn by staff aboard the River Queen, the floating casino that operated under special maritime licenses along this stretch of the Mississippi. This revelation transformed our understanding of the suited figure in Patrick's photograph entirely. Rather than representing some sinister criminal connection, the man was likely a casino employee, perhaps a dealer, floor manager, or administrative staff member. But this raised even more intriguing questions about Patrick O'Brien's relationship with the gambling establishment and what services he might have been providing beyond his known fishing activities. Holmes immediately dispatched me to investigate the casino connection while he continued examining the physical evidence at the dock. When I returned 2 hours later, his expression was grim. Someone had systematically erased the hard drive from the bait shack's backroom security camera, the one camera that would have provided a clear view of the blind eddy where larger vessels conducted their more discreet business transactions. The missing drive had left a perfect rectangular outline in the dust on Edwin Marsh's clipboard, and when Holmes compared the dimensions to the dents in the clipboard's surface, the match was exact. Our seemingly bumbling dock watchman had been far more actively involved in concealing evidence than his nervous demeanor had initially suggested. My investigation at the River Queen had yielded disturbing intelligence about Patrick's recent activities. According to discreet inquiries with the kitchen staff, Patrick had been making regular nighttime deliveries to the casino over the past 6 months. Not fish, as one might expect, but sealed packages that he transported in a waterproof compartment built into his skiff's hull. The casino staff had been instructed to accept these deliveries without questions and to ensure they reached specific individuals without going through normal inventory procedures. The suited man in the photograph was identified as Marcus Whitmore, the casino's head of security and cash management. Whitmore had disappeared 3 days prior to Patrick's vanishing, ostensibly on sudden family leave, though none of the staff recalled him mentioning any family emergencies in the weeks beforehand. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Holmes pieced together a working theory that painted Patrick not as a victim of random violence or supernatural forces, but as a courier in an organized operation designed to move cash or contraband away from the heavily regulated casino environment. The floating gambling establishment was subject to regular inspections by federal authorities, making it necessary to have off-book methods for handling certain types of transactions. The genius of the scheme lay in its simplicity. Who would suspect a weathered fisherman of transporting anything more valuable than his daily catch? Patrick's 30 years on the river gave him perfect cover, and his intimate knowledge of every eddy, sandbar, and hiding place made him an ideal courier for activities that required discretion and reliability. But something had gone wrong with this arrangement. The transversal laundry tag, originally dismissed as random debris, now anchored a much more complex motive structure. If Patrick had been recruited for these courier runs, someone had either decided he knew too much, had become unreliable, or had attempted to claim a larger share of whatever operation was being conducted. The missing hard drive represented a desperate attempt to control the narrative and eliminate evidence. Edwin Marsh's nervousness and bleach scent took on sinister new significance. He had not merely been a witness to Patrick's disappearance, but an active participant in its orchestration and subsequent cover-up. The rope sabotage began to make perfect sense within this framework. Patrick's boat had been disabled not to prevent his escape, but to ensure it would be found in a specific location at a predetermined time. The careful positioning against the piling, the still warm coffee, the shallow boot print, all of these details suggested a staging designed to create the appearance of mysterious vanishing, while concealing the true fate of both Patrick and whatever cargo he had been transporting. Holmes's expression grew darker as he realized the implications of our discoveries. We were no longer investigating a simple missing person case, or even a crime of passion between rival fishermen. We had stumbled into something far more dangerous, a criminal operation that extended beyond the local river community into the shadowy world of illegal gambling, money laundering, and the kind of organized corruption that left bodies in the Mississippi when complications arose. The storm clouds overhead seemed to mirror the gathering darkness of our investigation, and I found myself wondering whether Patrick O'Brien was truly missing, or whether we would eventually discover that the river had claimed another victim of human greed and betrayal. The revelation of Patrick's courier activities sent shockwaves through each of our key players, and their reactions revealed as much about their involvement as any physical evidence we might uncover. Margaret O'Brien's stoic facade cracked entirely when Holmes gently explained what we had discovered about her brother's nighttime activities. Her anger was immediate and fierce, not at Patrick, but at herself for failing to recognize the signs of his financial desperation. She confessed through tears that Patrick had been struggling with mounting medical bills for their elderly mother's care, and that his pride had prevented him from accepting help from family. The revelation that he had turned to illegal courier work to solve his financial problems transformed her grief into a complex mixture of relief and protective rage. At least now she knew he hadn't simply abandoned his responsibilities or met with a random accident. Deputy Crawford's territorial behavior shifted into something far more concerning when we shared our casino connection theory. Rather than showing professional interest in this development, he became increasingly defensive about jurisdiction and insisted that any investigation of the River Queen would require federal coordination that could take weeks to arrange. His pristine boots and nervous energy suggested he might have been receiving compensation for maintaining the status quo along his stretch of the waterfront. Silas Trent's reaction was perhaps the most revealing of all. When cleared of suspicion through the barge logs, his wounded pride gave way to a grudging respect for Holmes's methods. But more importantly, he volunteered information that he had previously withheld. Patrick had approached him 6 months ago about temporary crew work, claiming he needed to supplement his income quickly. Trent had turned him down, recommending that Patrick stick to fishing rather than getting involved with river people who wore suits. Edwin Marsh's transformation was the most dramatic. Once we confronted him with evidence of the missing hard drive, his nervous, bumbling act evaporated entirely. He became amiably helpful with suspicious speed, offering detailed information about boat schedules and traffic patterns that he had previously claimed not to notice. This sudden cooperation was itself a form of confession. Guilty parties often overcorrect when they realize their deception has been discovered. Holmes adjusted our investigative strategy based on these reactions. Rather than continuing to pursue physical evidence that might have been contaminated or destroyed, he focused on behavioral analysis and psychological pressure. He requested what seemed to be a benign favor, asking Marsh to provide the barge schedule for the previous week so we could better understand river traffic patterns during similar weather conditions. Marsh's response was immediate and telling. He flinched as if struck, then began misquoting times and dates with the kind of specific inaccuracy that comes from someone trying to reconstruct a lie they have told multiple times. His bleach scent became more pronounced under stress, And Holmes noted how the man's neat freak cleaning habits conflicted dramatically with his supposed sloppy record-keeping. This contradiction revealed the staged nature of his diligence. He cleaned obsessively to remove evidence while deliberately maintaining chaotic paperwork to obscure his actual activities. The psychology of our dock watchman became increasingly clear. Marsh was not a criminal mastermind, but rather an anxious accomplice who had been recruited precisely because his nervous, bumbling persona provided perfect cover for more systematic criminal activities. His genuine anxiety about being caught warred with his desperate need to maintain the financial benefits of his cooperation with the casino operation. Holmes decided to set a careful trap. He arranged for Captain Rivers to make casual inquiries about special cargo runs and cash transport services, while positioning Trent to observe and report on any unusual activity around the Blind Eddy. The goal was to create the impression that our investigation was focusing on current operations rather than Patrick's specific disappearance, hoping to flush out whoever was coordinating the criminal activities. The storm approaching from the west provided both urgency and cover for our adjusted strategy. Heavy rain would wash away remaining physical evidence but might also prompt desperate actions from those involved in the cover-up. People make mistakes when they feel cornered by time and circumstance, and Holmes was counting on this psychological pressure to reveal the full scope of what had happened to Patrick O'Brien. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the dock, I found myself wondering how many other mysterious disappearances along this stretch of river had been orchestrated to protect illegal operations. The Mississippi had a reputation for claiming lives, but Holmes's investigation was revealing that human predators were often more dangerous than natural currents. The game had evolved beyond a single missing fisherman into something far more complex and dangerous, and I sensed that we were approaching the point where those responsible would be forced to choose between confession and escalation. As we delved deeper into Patrick O'Brien's disappearance, unexpected complications began to surface that threatened to derail our investigation entirely. The first of these emerged from Margaret O'Brien herself, who had initially withheld crucial information about her family's financial situation. During a private conversation with Holmes, she reluctantly revealed that Patrick's disappearance had occurred just 2 days before a scheduled legal transfer of their late father's river cottage, a property worth considerably more than its modest appearance suggested due to its strategic location and water rights. The cottage sat on a prime piece of riverfront real estate that had been in the O'Brien family for 3 generations. With Patrick missing, the transfer would automatically default to Margaret as the sole surviving heir. While she insisted that money was the last thing on her mind, Holmes noted that the timing created a potential motive that we could not ignore. Had someone eliminated Patrick to prevent the property transfer, or was Patrick himself involved in some scheme related to the valuable land? Our investigation faced a significant institutional obstacle when the River Queen's legal team became aware of our inquiries. Within hours of my visit to the casino, a sharply dressed attorney arrived at the dock with an injunction threatening legal action if we continued to defame the casino's operations through what he termed reckless speculation and harassment of employees. The speed and coordination of this legal response suggested that our investigation had struck a sensitive nerve in the casino's operations. Deputy Crawford's enthusiastic support for the legal restrictions raised additional red flags about potential corruption within local law enforcement. He seemed far too eager to comply with demands that should have triggered professional skepticism from an honest officer. The pristine condition of his uniform and equipment in such a muddy environment began to seem less like professional pride and more like evidence of someone who spent more time in offices than on actual patrol duties. Just as these institutional barriers were threatening to shut down our investigation entirely, we received an anonymous tip that seemed too convenient to be trusted. A handwritten note delivered by a street child who claimed to have been paid by a man in a dark coat provided detailed information about a supposed smuggler's tunnel system running beneath the levee. According to the tip, this tunnel network was used to move contraband between the river and inland distribution points, and Patrick had discovered the operation shortly before his disappearance. Holmes approached this information with characteristic skepticism, but the potential for a breakthrough compelled us to investigate. We spent an entire afternoon conducting a systematic ground survey of the area indicated in the anonymous tip, using techniques that Holmes had learned during his studies of underground London. What we discovered was both illuminating and disappointing. There was indeed a tunnel system beneath the levee, but it consisted of collapsed drainage infrastructure that had been abandoned years earlier. The tunnel investigation served as a valuable lesson in the psychology of criminal misdirection. Someone had taken the time to research local geography and infrastructure, then crafted a plausible but ultimately false lead designed to consume our time and energy while they completed whatever cover-up activities were necessary. The sophistication of this deception suggested that we were dealing with individuals who understood investigation techniques and were actively working to stay several steps ahead of our efforts. Holmes documented this misdirection as evidence of organized opposition rather than disappointment at a false lead. The fact that someone was investing significant effort in derailing our investigation proved that we were approaching dangerous truths. Criminal organizations typically ignore minor threats, but they respond with increasing desperation when investigators get close to exposing their core operations. The red herring also revealed something important about the timeline of our opposition's activities. The anonymous tip required advanced planning, local knowledge, and coordination with accomplices. This suggested that Patrick's disappearance was not a spontaneous crime of opportunity, but rather part of a systematic operation designed to eliminate problems and protect ongoing criminal enterprises. As evening approached and the storm clouds gathered overhead, Holmes made a crucial decision about our investigative priorities. Rather than continuing to chase leads that might be deliberately planted distractions, we would focus on the human elements that could not be easily manipulated or falsified. People's behavior under pressure, their unconscious habits, and their emotional reactions to specific stimuli would provide more reliable evidence than physical clues that could be planted, altered, or destroyed. The lesson of the tunnel deception had taught us that we were engaged in a chess match with opponents who understood the rules of investigation and were playing several moves ahead. But Holmes had taught me that the greatest weakness of criminal organizations is their reliance on human cooperation, and humans inevitably reveal their secrets through the very actions they take to conceal them. The investigation took a profoundly personal turn when Margaret O'Brien requested a private meeting with Holmes away from the bustling activity of the dock. We met her at the modest river cottage that had become central to our emerging understanding of the case's complexities. Inside the simple but well-maintained home, surrounded by photographs chronicling 3 generations of O'Brien family life along the Mississippi, she made a confession that transformed our entire perspective on Patrick's disappearance. Through tears that she had held back for days, Margaret revealed that Patrick had approached her 2 weeks before his vanishing with a proposal that had terrified her. He had discovered something about the casino operations during his courier runs, something significant enough that he believed it could provide them with financial security for the rest of their lives. But accessing this opportunity would require one final, highly dangerous delivery run that would likely attract federal attention and potentially destroy their family's reputation in the river community. Patrick had begged her to understand that their mother's medical bills were bankrupting the family, and that his normal fishing income, even supplemented by the courier work, was insufficient to provide the care she needed. He had promised that after this one last job, he would have enough money to pay for proper medical treatment and still leave the family financially secure. Margaret had pleaded with him to find another way, but Patrick's pride and desperation had made him deaf to her concerns. The emotional weight of this revelation was crushing. Margaret now faced the horrible possibility that her brother had not been murdered by criminal associates, but had voluntarily entered into an agreement that he knew might cost him his life. Her grief was complicated by guilt. Should she have been more supportive of his desperate plan, or had she been right to oppose it? Either way, her final conversation with Patrick had been an argument, and that knowledge was destroying her. Holmes faced his own ethical dilemma in responding to this information. Margaret begged him to protect Patrick's reputation regardless of what we discovered about his fate. She argued that if Patrick had died trying to provide for his family, he deserved to be remembered as a devoted brother and son, rather than as someone who had gotten involved with criminals. But Holmes's commitment to truth and justice made it impossible for him to promise that he could control how the investigation would ultimately be perceived by the community. The cottage itself seemed to hold memories that added to the emotional complexity of our situation. Family photographs showed Patrick as a young man, full of hope and ambition, gradually aging into someone worn down by financial pressures and family responsibilities. His fishing awards and community service certificates revealed a man who had been deeply respected by his peers before desperation drove him toward illegal activities. Holmes discovered evidence of Patrick's internal struggle in his personal belongings. A journal hidden beneath loose floorboards contained entries that revealed his growing awareness of the moral compromises required by his courier work, balanced against his fear that his mother would die without proper medical care. The entries stopped abruptly 3 weeks before his disappearance, suggesting that he had made a final decision about the dangerous job that Margaret had described. But the emotional revelations extended beyond Patrick's immediate family. Holmes had identified a pattern in Edwin Marsh's behavior that suggested the dock watchman had been witness to at least one previous accident involving someone who had become problematic to the casino's operations. When Holmes confronted him with subtle questions about river casualties over the past 2 years, Marsh's reaction revealed a haunted quality that spoke of someone carrying the weight of multiple secrets. The psychology of complicity became central to understanding how the criminal operation had maintained its security. Marsh was not a hardened criminal, but rather someone who had been gradually drawn into increasingly serious compromises. His obsessive cleaning rituals and nervous behavior reflected his awareness that he was in far deeper than his initial agreement had implied, but his financial dependence on the operation made it impossible for him to withdraw. Holmes realized that we were dealing with a tragedy that extended far beyond Patrick's disappearance. The casino's courier operation had systematically exploited the economic desperation of local residents, offering financial solutions that came with prices that were never fully explained until it was too late to escape. Patrick was likely not the first person to discover that the easy money came with deadly strings attached. The emotional stakes of our investigation had escalated beyond simple justice for a missing person. We were now confronting a system that preyed on families in crisis, and every decision we made about how to proceed would affect not only the resolution of Patrick's case, but potentially the safety of other vulnerable community members who might be involved in similar arrangements. The investigation entered a dangerous new phase when Holmes identified a disturbing pattern in the physical evidence that suggested Patrick's disappearance was not an isolated incident, but part of a systematic operation designed to eliminate security risks. His analysis of the rope sabotage revealed techniques that were too sophisticated and specific to have been developed for a single crime. Someone had perfected these methods through prior experience. The mooring lines that had been cut to disable Patrick's boat showed a distinctive diagonal pattern that Holmes initially assumed was designed to mimic damage from a boat propeller, but closer examination revealed that the cuts were made with a specialized tool that created a specific type of fray pattern. When Holmes tested similar cuts on sample rope, he discovered that this particular technique would cause catastrophic failure only under specific stress conditions, such as when a boat was being operated at full throttle in rough water. This revelation led to a chilling realization about the intended fate of Patrick's mission. The sabotage was not designed to merely disable his boat at the dock, but to ensure that it would fail catastrophically once he was in deep water with no possibility of rescue. The fact that his boat had been found intact suggested that either the sabotage had been discovered before Patrick attempted his final run, or that the plans had been changed at the last minute for reasons we had yet to understand. Holmes's investigation of Edwin Marsh's cleaning obsession revealed another systematic element of the criminal operation. The dock watchman's use of bleach was not random nervous behavior, but a deliberate technique designed to eliminate traces of blood and other biological evidence from the dock areas. Laboratory analysis of water samples from the dock's drainage system showed traces of human blood that had been treated with bleach but not entirely eliminated. The blood evidence suggested that the dock had been used as a location where problems were resolved before bodies were disposed of in the river. The bleach treatment would eliminate most forensic evidence, while the iron scent of blood would dissipate quickly in the humid river environment. This systematic approach to evidence elimination indicated that the casino's security operations included capabilities far beyond simple debt collection or employee discipline. Holmes also discovered that the timing of boat traffic was being manipulated to provide cover for these activities. Barge schedules had been coordinated with casino deliveries to ensure that the rumble of large vessels would mask any sounds associated with violence or struggle. The diesel engines of multiple barges operating simultaneously would create enough noise pollution to prevent screams or gunshots from carrying to nearby residential areas. Our investigation received a violent shock when Captain Rivers reported that his detailed river charts, the same ones he had been using to help us understand current patterns and timing, had been stolen from his boat during the previous night. More disturbing still, someone had attempted to break into his home while he was out helping with our investigation, and only the unexpected return of his neighbor had prevented a thorough search of his property. The theft of the charts and attempted burglary made it clear that our investigation was being actively monitored by people who understood exactly what evidence we were gathering and how it might be used to expose their operations. They were not content to simply mislead us with false clues. They were now taking direct action to eliminate the tools and resources we needed to solve Patrick's disappearance. The psychological impact of this escalation was significant for all of our allies. Captain Rivers, who had initially been enthusiastic about helping to solve the mystery, became noticeably more cautious about his involvement. Silas Trent, despite his clearance from suspicion, began looking over his shoulder and limiting his cooperation to information that could not be traced back to him. Even Margaret O'Brien started questioning whether pursuing the truth was worth the potential danger to those trying to help her. The storm front that had been approaching throughout our investigation finally arrived with dramatic intensity. Weather sirens wailed across the river valley as water levels rose rapidly, threatening to wash away any remaining physical evidence and contaminate the crime scene with debris from upstream. The natural time pressure of the storm was now combined with the artificial pressure created by increasingly desperate criminal actions. Holmes made the critical decision to set a trap that would force our opponents to reveal themselves through direct action, rather than continuing to play a defensive game of Holmes made the critical decision to set a trap that would force our opponents to reveal themselves through direct action, rather than continuing to play a defensive game of evidence destruction and misdirection. He arranged for word to spread through the river community that we had discovered Patrick's hidden cache of evidence, documents and photographs that supposedly proved the full extent of the casino's illegal operations. This carefully planted information was designed to create urgency among those responsible for Patrick's disappearance. If they believed that damning evidence still existed and might be recovered, they would be forced to take immediate action to locate and destroy it. Holmes positioned our allies strategically around the waterfront, with Captain Rivers monitoring boat traffic from his elevated pilot house, Silas Trent watching the blind eddy where secret meetings had taken place, and Deputy Crawford, despite our suspicions about his loyalty, assigned to document any unusual activity for the official record. The bait was a waterproof container that Holmes had secreted in the same type of hiding place where Patrick might have concealed evidence, tucked beneath the collapsed pier structure where the blind eddy provided natural concealment. The container held nothing more than river stones and blank paper, but its presence would serve as proof of criminal intent when someone inevitably came to retrieve what they believed to be incriminating evidence. The convergence of our various investigative threads began when Holmes made a crucial connection between the casino uniform laundry service and the broader criminal network operating along the Mississippi. The hotel tag we had discovered was not merely a piece of random debris, but a deliberate breadcrumb that connected the casino's legitimate operations to a much more extensive money laundering scheme that extended throughout the regional business community. The laundry service that cleaned the River Queen's uniforms also handled linens and clothing for 3 other businesses that Holmes had identified as potential fronts, including the bait shack where Edwin Marsh kept his suspicious records. This shared service provider created the perfect opportunity for communication between different elements of the criminal organization without requiring direct contact that might attract law enforcement attention. Holmes's investigation of the supplier network revealed that cash from the casino's off-book operations was being cleaned through a complex system of inflated service contracts and fictional business expenses. The bait shack, which should have generated modest profits from selling fishing supplies and snacks, was reporting income levels that suggested either remarkable business success or systematic fraud. Given the shop's modest customer base and limited inventory, fraud seemed far more likely. The tunnel deception that had initially seemed like a simple misdirection now revealed its true purpose within this broader context. The detailed knowledge of local geography and infrastructure required to create such a plausible false lead indicated that the criminal organization included individuals with access to municipal records and engineering surveys. This level of institutional penetration suggested corruption that extended well beyond a few corrupt dock workers and casino employees. Our investigation finally debunked the tunnel myth completely when Holmes conducted a historical survey of the area's drainage systems. The collapsed infrastructure we had discovered dated back nearly a decade, and geological surveys proved that no recent construction or excavation had occurred in the area described by our anonymous tipster. The entire tunnel story had been fabricated using genuine historical records as a foundation, creating a lie that would pass casual inspection but collapse under detailed scrutiny. This revelation provided an important lesson about the sophistication of our opponents. They were not merely reactive criminals covering up a spontaneous crime, but rather a well-organized operation with access to research resources, technical expertise, and institutional knowledge. The systematic nature of their misdirection efforts suggested that they had dealt with law enforcement investigations before and had developed refined techniques for controlling and manipulating official inquiries. Holmes prepared our surveillance operation with careful attention to the psychology of criminal behavior under pressure. He arranged for multiple observation points that would allow us to monitor the bait location from different angles while remaining concealed from anyone approaching the container. Silas Trent's knowledge of boat operations and river currents made him an ideal lookout for waterborne approaches, while Captain Rivers' elevated position provided comprehensive oversight of the entire area. The storm conditions actually worked in our favor by reducing visibility and masking our movements. The heavy rain and wind provided natural cover for our positioning while creating urgency for anyone who needed to retrieve the supposed evidence before weather conditions made it inaccessible. Holmes calculated that our opponents would be forced to act within a narrow window of time, reducing their ability to conduct careful reconnaissance or plan elaborate counter-surveillance measures. Deputy Crawford's role in our operation remained problematic due to our suspicions about his potential corruption. Holmes assigned him to maintain the official record of events, a task that would either prove his innocence through proper documentation or provide evidence of obstruction if he attempted to interfere with or misrepresent our activities. Either outcome would serve our investigative purposes. The convergence of evidence, suspects, and opportunity created a sense of inevitable resolution that I had experienced in many of Holmes's previous cases. All the elements were aligned for a final confrontation that would reveal the truth about Patrick's disappearance and expose the criminal network that had been operating along this stretch of the Mississippi. The storm overhead seemed to mirror the gathering tension as we approached the climactic moment when all our careful preparation would be tested. As darkness fell and the rain intensified, I found myself reflecting on how far we had traveled from the simple mystery of a missing fisherman to the complex web of corruption, violence, and systematic criminal enterprise that we were now prepared to expose. The Mississippi had indeed claimed another victim, but not through natural forces, through the far more dangerous currents of human greed and institutional failure. The game was approaching its endgame, and soon we would learn whether our careful trap would expose the truth or whether our opponents' desperation would drive them to even more dangerous measures to protect their criminal operations. The pieces of Patrick O'Brien's disappearance finally coalesced into a comprehensive understanding of the criminal operation that had claimed his life. Holmes's systematic analysis revealed a chilling picture of how institutional corruption and individual desperation had combined to create a murder disguised as a mysterious vanishing. The dock watchman, Edwin Marsh, had not been a mere accomplice, but rather the key coordinator who made the entire operation possible through his legitimate position and access to critical infrastructure. Marsh's role as the handler explained every anomaly we had encountered during our investigation. His position gave him perfect knowledge of boat schedules, weather conditions, and law enforcement patrol patterns. His legitimate access to cleaning supplies provided cover for the bleach odor that had initially puzzled us, while his nervous behavior served as perfect misdirection. People expected dock workers to be anxious around authority figures, making his genuine fear of exposure seem like normal working-class discomfort. The timeline of Patrick's final night became crystal clear through Holmes's reconstruction. At 4:13 in the morning, Patrick had purchased fuel for what he believed would be his final courier run, the dangerous job that would provide enough money to pay for his mother's medical care and secure his family's financial future. But Marsh had sabotaged the boat's propeller and mooring lines, ensuring that Patrick would never reach open water alive. The rope sabotage served multiple purposes in Marsh's plan. The fouled propeller would prevent Patrick from escaping if he discovered the trap, while the weakened mooring lines were designed to fail at a specific point during the struggle, creating the impression that the boat had broken free naturally during bad weather. The staged fuel receipt and mooring fee payment created an artificial timeline that would confuse investigators and provide alibis for the real perpetrators. The casino connection explained the motive behind Patrick's murder. As a courier, he had gained access to information about the money laundering operation that extended far beyond simple gambling profits. The casino was processing cash from multiple illegal enterprises throughout the region, using its maritime license and federal exemptions to avoid the banking regulations that would normally detect such large-scale financial crimes. Patrick had discovered that the operation was worth millions rather than the modest supplemental income he had initially been promised. Marsh's method of operation revealed the systematic nature of his crimes. The bleach was used not just to clean up after Patrick's murder, but to eliminate traces of previous victims who had become problematic to the organization. The dock's drainage system had been modified to ensure that biological evidence would be washed directly into the Mississippi, where river currents would disperse any remaining traces beyond forensic detection. The stolen camera drives represented Marsh's most vulnerable point in the cover-up operation. His access to the surveillance equipment was necessary to eliminate evidence, but the theft also created a digital trail that could be traced back to him through access logs and timestamp analysis. His nervous behavior when questioned about security footage reflected his awareness that this aspect of the crime could not be easily explained away. Holmes's analysis of the barge scheduling revealed the sophisticated coordination required for Marsh's operation. The timing of Patrick's murder had been carefully planned to coincide with the passage of multiple freight barges, whose diesel engines would mask any sounds of struggle or violence. The wake from the barges would also disturb the water surface and potentially move Patrick's body away from the immediate crime scene. The hotel laundry tag that had initially seemed like random debris now revealed its significance as evidence of institutional coordination. Marsh had been in direct communication with casino security staff about the timing and method of Patrick's elimination. The tag had been planted as a false clue designed to suggest that Patrick had been killed by casino employees rather than by local accomplices, creating misdirection that would protect the broader criminal network. The maximum risk point came when Holmes realized that Marsh's desperation was increasing exponentially as our investigation progressed. The attempted theft of Captain Rivers's charts and the break-in at his home indicated that Marsh was prepared to use violence against our allies to protect his position. The systematic nature of these attacks suggested that we were dealing with someone who had killed before and would not hesitate to kill again. The approaching floodgate release created the perfect crisis point for our trap. Marsh would be forced to act quickly to retrieve what he believed was Patrick's hidden evidence before the rising water levels made the hiding place inaccessible. This natural deadline would prevent him from conducting careful surveillance or bringing additional help, creating the ideal conditions for exposing his guilt through direct action. As we prepared for the final confrontation, Holmes made one last crucial discovery. A text message warning had been sent to Silas Trent's phone reading, "River takes what it wants." Only Edwin Marsh knew that Trent used that particular alias when conducting business away from the main docks. The final trap was set against the dramatic backdrop of the Mississippi storm, with fog rolling thick across the water while generator drones masked the sound of our movements into position. Holmes had divided our team strategically. Captain Rivers positioned in his elevated pilot house to maintain overall surveillance, Silas Trent acting as a provocateur to draw Marsh into action, and Deputy Crawford assigned to document whatever transpired. Despite our continuing suspicions about his loyalty, the sensory details of that night remain etched in my memory with startling clarity. Wet rope fibers stuck to our gloves as we handled lines and equipment. Diesel fuel created rainbow patterns under the harsh floodlights that illuminated the dock area, and the cry of a solitary gull provided an eerie counterpoint to the mechanical sounds of our surveillance equipment. Every shadow seemed to conceal potential danger, and every sound carried the possibility of discovery or betrayal. Holmes had positioned the bait container in the most psychologically compelling location, beneath the collapsed pier structure, where the blind eddy created natural concealment. The container appeared to be exactly the type of hiding place that a desperate courier might use to secure evidence against his criminal associates. Its placement required specific local knowledge to locate, ensuring that only someone intimately familiar with the dock area would know where to search. Edwin Marsh arrived earlier than Holmes had anticipated, approaching through the fog with a bleach jug and a magnetic grappling hook, tools that immediately confirmed his guilt and revealed his method for retrieving evidence from underwater hiding places. His movements showed the confidence of someone who had performed similar operations multiple times before, and his equipment indicated systematic planning rather than spontaneous criminal activity. The psychological tension escalated when Marsh began his systematic search of the hiding area. We could observe his methodical approach through night vision equipment as he used the grappling hook to probe underwater crevices and explored every possible concealment spot with the patience of someone who understood exactly what he was looking for. His behavior confirmed that Patrick had indeed hidden evidence in similar locations, and that Marsh had successfully retrieved and destroyed such materials before. But the unforeseen complications began when weather sirens triggered the floodgate release half a minute earlier than scheduled, creating immediate chaos in our carefully planned operation. Radio static interfered with our communication systems just as Deputy Crawford slipped on the wet dock surface, creating enough noise to alert Marsh to our presence. The plan that had seemed foolproof suddenly required immediate improvisation under the most dangerous possible circumstances. Holmes made the split-second decision to abandon concealment and confront Marsh directly before he could escape into the fog and darkness. The confrontation occurred at the moment when Marsh's grappling hook had snagged not our bait container, but Patrick's actual hidden cache, a waterproof panel from his skiff that contained the evidence that had cost him his life. The current surge from the early floodgate release threatened to sweep this crucial evidence into the main channel, where it would be lost forever. The physical struggle that ensued was brief but decisive. Marsh's desperation gave him initial advantage, but his guilt and fear made him clumsy in ways that Holmes's training and experience could exploit. The bleach jug became a liability when its contents spilled across the wet dock surface, creating slippery conditions that worked against the man who had brought it as a tool for evidence destruction. Captain Rivers' elevated position proved crucial during the struggle, as his shouts of direction and warning allowed Holmes to anticipate Marsh's movements and avoid being pushed into the dangerous current. Silas Trent's knowledge of river conditions enabled him to position himself to intercept the evidence panel as it began to drift away from the dock, while Deputy Crawford's documentation efforts, despite our suspicions about his loyalty, created an official record that would be essential for legal proceedings. The moment of final revelation came when the grappling hook's snag on Patrick's hidden cache broke free under the pressure of the surge, releasing a waterproof container filled with cash bands and casino ledgers that had been bagged in plastic to survive underwater concealment. The evidence was physically chained to Marsh through partial fingerprints on the bleach jug and the distinctive misoriented bowline knot that matched his dock maintenance work. The fog seemed to lift symbolically as Marsh's confession poured out under the pressure of being caught with the evidence that proved his systematic criminal activities. The pride he had taken in cleaning everything efficiently had left unmistakable patterns of overscrubbing around areas where he feared forensic detection, a signature that connected him definitively to both Patrick's murder and previous crimes. The confrontation with Edwin Marsh reached its peak intensity as the full scope of his systematic criminal operation became undeniably clear. The waterproof cache that his grappling hook had accidentally snagged contained not only the casino ledgers and cash bands that Patrick had discovered, but also a detailed record of previous accidents that Marsh had orchestrated to protect the money laundering network. The evidence revealed at least 4 other mysterious disappearances along this stretch of the Mississippi over the past 2 years, all involving individuals who had become problematic to the casino's operations. Marsh's confession, extracted under the psychological pressure of being caught with irrefutable evidence, painted a chilling picture of how institutional corruption had enabled systematic murder. His position as dock watchman had made him invaluable to the criminal organization because he could control access to crime scenes, manipulate evidence, and coordinate with boat traffic to ensure that violent acts occurred during periods when detection was unlikely. The alternation between our carefully planned trap and Marsh's desperate improvisations created a deadly game of action and reaction that pushed both sides to their operational limits. When our original surveillance positions were compromised by the early floodgate release, Holmes had to rapidly reposition our team while maintaining pressure on Marsh to prevent his escape. The dock area became a chessboard where every move carried potentially fatal consequences. Marsh's shift from the main dock to the blind eddy represented his recognition that our trap had been sprung and his only hope of survival lay in reaching the hidden boat that he had prepared as an escape route. His knowledge of the waterfront's geography gave him tactical advantages that nearly allowed him to evade capture, but his psychological desperation led him to make crucial errors in judgment under pressure. The unexpected element that nearly derailed our entire operation was Deputy Crawford's genuine slip on the wet dock surface, an accident that occurred at precisely the moment when stealth was most critical to our success. The sound of his fall and subsequent radio chatter alerted Marsh to our presence just as he was retrieving the evidence that would prove his guilt. This unforeseen complication forced Holmes to abandon the careful documentation approach and shift to immediate physical intervention. Captain Rivers' position in the pilot house became crucial when his elevated vantage point allowed him to track Marsh's movements through the fog and coordinate our response to his escape attempts. His knowledge of current patterns and boat handling enabled him to predict where Marsh would attempt to launch his getaway vessel and position our team to intercept him before he could reach open water. The radio static that interfered with our communications created additional tension by isolating team members at critical moments when coordination was essential. Holmes's hand signals and whistle codes became the primary means of maintaining tactical coordination, but the storm conditions made even these backup communication methods unreliable and dangerous. Silas Trent's role evolved from passive observer to active participant when Marsh's escape route brought him directly through the area where Trent was positioned. The former suspect's knowledge of boat operations and river hazards made him an effective backup when our primary containment strategy was compromised by weather and communication failures. The psychological warfare between Holmes and Marsh intensified as each man recognized the other's tactical capabilities and adapted their strategies accordingly. Marsh's experience in covering up previous crimes had given him confidence in his ability to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses, but Holmes's systematic approach to crime scene analysis had identified patterns that Marsh had never realized were visible to trained observation. The environmental factors, rising water levels, increasing wind speed, and deteriorating visibility, created a ticking clock that forced both sides to accept greater risks than they would normally choose. Marsh's desperation to retrieve and destroy the evidence led him to expose himself to capture, while Holmes's commitment to preserving the evidence led him to accept physical danger that he might normally avoid through more cautious methods. The moment when everything hung in balance came as Marsh's grappling hook snag broke free under the pressure of the surge, threatening to sweep Patrick's hidden cache into the main channel where the evidence of multiple murders would be lost forever. The choice between apprehending Marsh and saving the evidence that could convict him represented the kind of split-second decision that defines the outcome of complex criminal investigations. The cut to black that followed this critical moment reflected the uncertain outcome that occurs when careful planning meets uncontrollable circumstances and human desperation. Success or failure would be determined in the next few seconds by factors that no amount of detective work could predict or control. The Mississippi seemed to hold its breath as justice balanced on the edge of a knife, waiting to discover whether truth would triumph over corruption or whether the river would claim both evidence and justice in its relentless current. The surge of water from the early floodgate release created the perfect storm of chaos and revelation that brought our investigation to its dramatic conclusion. As the current threatened to sweep away Patrick's hidden cache of evidence, Edwin Marsh made the fatal decision to lunge for the waterproof container, sacrificing any chance of escape in a desperate attempt to destroy the proof of his crimes. This moment of criminal desperation provided exactly the physical evidence that Holmes needed to construct an unassailable case. The waterproof panel that broke free from Patrick's skiff revealed its secrets as the surge carried it toward the main channel. Inside the specially constructed compartment, protected by layers of plastic and sealed with marine-grade adhesive, were casino ledgers documenting systematic money laundering operations worth millions of dollars, rubber-banded stacks of cash representing skimmed profits, and most damaging of all, a detailed record of Marsh's previous victims and their elimination methods. Patrick's hidden evidence included photographs of cash transfers, recorded conversations between casino staff and their criminal associates, and a written account of how he had discovered the full scope of the operation during what he had initially believed were simple courier runs. His documentation revealed that the casino was processing money from drug trafficking, illegal gambling, and protection rackets throughout the Mississippi River Valley, using their federal maritime licenses to avoid banking regulations that would normally detect such large-scale financial crimes. The physical evidence that definitively connected Marsh to both Patrick's murder and the broader criminal conspiracy came from sources he had never realized were traceable. Partial fingerprints on the bleach jug matched his employment records, while chemical analysis of the cleaning supplies linked him to the systematic evidence destruction that had enabled years of criminal activity. Most significantly, the misoriented bowline knots found at multiple crime scenes matched the distinctive tying technique that Marsh used during his routine dock maintenance work. Holmes's systematic reconstruction of the crime revealed Marsh's fatal flaw. His pride in thorough cleaning had created unmistakable patterns of over-scrubbing around areas where he feared forensic detection. These antiseptic signatures were visible under ultraviolet light and chemical analysis, creating a forensic fingerprint that connected him to every location where he had attempted to eliminate evidence of violence. The emotional resolution of Patrick's disappearance provided both justice and tragedy in equal measure. Patrick had not been killed by random violence or supernatural forces, but had been murdered because his courier work had given him access to information that threatened a criminal organization worth millions. His desperate attempt to provide for his family's medical expenses had led him into a web of corruption that ultimately cost him his life when he tried to leverage his knowledge for a larger share of the profits. The boat that had seemed to vanish mysteriously had actually been carefully staged to drift into discovery at a predetermined time while Patrick was being coerced, murdered, and his body disposed of in the deep channel upstream. The still warm coffee, the shallow boot print, and the perfectly positioned vessel were all elements of an elaborate deception designed to suggest supernatural disappearance while concealing the mundane reality of systematic murder for financial gain. Marsh's confession, extracted under the psychological pressure of being caught with irrefutable evidence, revealed the scope of institutional corruption that had enabled his crimes. Local law enforcement, casino management, and municipal officials had all received compensation for maintaining the status quo and ensuring that investigations into river accidents remained perfunctory and inconclusive. The cost of justice extended beyond Patrick's individual case to encompass the systematic exploitation of economic desperation throughout the river community. The casino's courier operation had deliberately targeted families in financial crisis, offering solutions that came with hidden prices that were never fully explained until victims were too deeply involved to escape safely. Captain Rivers's documentation of the confrontation, combined with Deputy Crawford's official report, which proved his innocence through proper procedure despite our suspicions, created a legal record that would support prosecution not only of Marsh, but of the broader criminal network that had employed him. The evidence recovered from Patrick's cache provided leads for federal investigators to pursue money laundering charges against the casino and its associated businesses. The symbolic significance of solving the case during the storm seemed to reflect the cleansing power of truth over deception. The Mississippi, which had been used as a tool for disposing of evidence and eliminating witnesses, ultimately provided the conditions that exposed the criminal operation and brought justice for its victims. The resolution proved that even the most carefully planned criminal conspiracies contain the seeds of their own destruction through the human elements that cannot be completely controlled or predicted. Marsh's systematic approach to murder had created patterns that enabled detection, while his psychological need to clean and control had left traces that revealed his guilt to trained observation. The aftermath of Edwin Marsh's arrest sent shockwaves throughout the Mississippi River community that extended far beyond the immediate resolution of Patrick O'Brien's disappearance. Federal authorities, armed with the evidence recovered from Patrick's waterproof cache, launched a comprehensive investigation that ultimately revealed the casino operation as part of a multi-state money laundering network, processing illegal profits from dozens of criminal enterprises throughout the river valley. Marsh faced charges not only for Patrick's murder, but for 4 additional homicides that had been disguised as accidental drownings or mysterious disappearances over the previous 2 years. His systematic documentation of his crimes, originally intended as insurance against his criminal associates, became the primary evidence for prosecution. The legal proceedings revealed how institutional corruption had enabled years of systematic murder and financial crime through the coordination of local law enforcement, municipal officials, and federal license holders. Margaret O'Brien's reaction to the resolution of her brother's case reflected the complex emotions that accompany justice achieved at such a terrible cost. While she expressed gratitude for finally learning the truth about Patrick's fate, the knowledge that he had been murdered for trying to provide medical care for their mother added layers of guilt and anger to her grief. The river cottage that had seemed to complicate our investigation became a memorial to Patrick's sacrifice and a symbol of the family values that had ultimately led to his death. The financial resolution of Patrick's case provided unexpected benefits for his family. The evidence of systematic fraud and criminal conspiracy enabled Margaret to file civil suits that recovered significant damages from the casino and its associated businesses. While no amount of money could compensate for Patrick's loss, the settlements ensured that their mother received the medical care that Patrick had died trying to provide, and that the family would be financially secure for the remainder of their lives. Captain Rivers emerged as an unlikely hero whose knowledge and courage had been essential to exposing the criminal network. His stolen charts were recovered during raids on casino properties, and federal authorities commissioned him to create new navigational resources marked with the notation, "Earned, not given," a quiet acknowledgement of his contribution to justice. His pilot house became a memorial to the victims of river crime and a symbol of the honest river workers who refused to be corrupted by criminal money. Silas Trent's exoneration and subsequent cooperation with the investigation earned him both community respect and federal witness protection support. His knowledge of river operations and criminal activities proved invaluable to ongoing prosecutions, and his testimony helped convict multiple associates of the casino money laundering operation. The debts that had initially made him a suspect were resolved through victim compensation programs, allowing him to rebuild his fishing business with dignity intact. Deputy Crawford's role in the case resolution proved more complex than our initial suspicions had suggested. While his territorial behavior and pristine appearance had seemed suspicious, investigation revealed that he had been conducting his own parallel inquiry into river disappearances, but lacked the resources and expertise to identify the criminal patterns that Holmes had detected. His documentation of our confrontation with Marsh provided crucial legal evidence, and his cooperation with federal authorities led to his promotion within the parish law enforcement system. The resignification of objects that had seemed insignificant during the investigation provided powerful symbols of memory and justice. Margaret's St. Jude medal, once rubbed raw from worry, now hangs from Patrick's repaired skiff as a quiet monument to perseverance over superstition. The boat itself, restored and blessed by the local parish, serves as a memorial to all victims of river crime and a reminder that truth ultimately prevails over deception. The broader implications of the case extended throughout the Mississippi River region, as federal authorities used Patrick's evidence to identify and prosecute similar criminal operations at other casino and maritime facilities. The systematic nature of the money laundering scheme had involved dozens of businesses and hundreds of individual participants, creating a web of corruption that required years of additional investigation to fully unravel. Holmes's final reflection on the case focused on the lingering question of moral complexity in desperate circumstances. While Patrick had clearly been a victim of murder and exploitation, his initial decision to participate in courier activities raised difficult questions about the relationship between economic desperation and criminal complicity. How much responsibility did Patrick bear for the consequences of his choices? And what does society owe to individuals who turn to illegal activities out of family necessity rather than personal greed? The Mississippi continues to flow past the dock where Patrick O'Brien made his final departure, carrying with it the memories of justice achieved and lives lost to human greed. The river's eternal movement serves as a reminder that while individual cases may be solved and criminals may be prosecuted, the underlying conditions that create desperation and enable corruption require constant vigilance and systematic social response. Before we conclude today's extraordinary investigation, I want to hear from you in the comments below. Which clue do you think was the most crucial in solving Patrick's disappearance? And don't forget to subscribe for more cases that will challenge everything you think you know about mystery and deduction. Trust me, you won't want to miss what we uncover next along these treacherous waters. The final lesson of the case remains that justice by water's edge requires not only skilled investigation, but also the courage to confront institutional corruption and the wisdom to distinguish between victims and perpetrators when desperation blurs the lines of moral clarity.